When we look at a map of the Sword Coast, it's very difficult not to fantasize about many of these locations, since you know, of course, that every single little piece of this land has tons of lore written about them. There is legit history on these places. They appear in novels, video games, D&D adventures, and of course, now even movies. Now, one of the places that always catches people's eyes is right here. The Mere of Dead Men. It's such a dramatic name, but it's fairly apt. The swamp is filled with undead, monsters, yuan-ti, powerful reptiles, and if legends are true, even liches prowl these waters. The Mere appears to be cursed as well. It doesn't matter how many times the cities of the north reroute the road so that it passes far away from the swamp always seems to catch up to just barely touch the road. It never takes over the road, it just always expands to just touch it. Of course, with legendary locations such as these, there's always the question of who or what rules it, and what kind of power could such a being possess? Well, before we get into it, this is the last week for you to check out our 5th edition campaign, Sands of Doom, on Kickstarter. In Sands of Doom, you get to explore the adventure in an open world format where you get to decide which missions to complete and which ones to ignore. As a massive undead army slowly marches through the desert in a collision course towards the capital city, players will only have so much time before the Great Siege happens. Each day that passes, the army gets closer and closer to the city. Some options will open and other options will close, as the decisions that you make along the way will shift and change the decisions that villains and allies also take. Plus, many of the important events on the adventure and even certain roaming bosses have very specific schedules that they follow, so players can learn of unfolding events and take initiative, or they can arrive too late or too early, with consequences either way. On the same vein, our villains have their own objectives that they are seeking to fulfill. Leaving them alone to mind their own business might close or even open new options for you to explore in the adventure. In Sands of Doom, options and choice comes at the forefront. When the undead army sieges the city, all the choices that you have made along the way will come to bear. Whether it be who fights at your side, how much power has the enemy collected, or maybe even whether Lord Amu will be the one leading the horde or not. This is an adventure filled with secrets, an adventure where even failure can lead to newer opportunities. Sands of Doom is a 5th edition campaign for characters level 1 to level 11, and right now, it is the last week for you to get it. Click the link in the video description and check it out. I have put my heart and soul onto this project, and I know that you will love it. We are running out of time, so thank you so much for your support. And now, onto the video. To tell this story, it is important to go back about 1500 years ago, before the Mere of Dead Men even existed. Back then, this land was prosperous and fertile, and on it was a small kingdom called Uthtower. The kingdom had just lost his king, and then chaos ensued when it came time to announce the successor. See, the king had sired twins, both of which had a claim to the throne, so what the council of the kingdom decided upon was to sort of split the kingdom in such a way so as to grant each son their own piece, and then they commissioned perfectly identical regalia for each of them, and included in this were identical crowns that each would bear. The creator of the crowns was the High Mage of the kingdom, a man named Inierb. He enchanted the crowns so as to grant the kings a lot of different protections, such as a basic protective magic, the ability to teleport, and of course, immunity to spells that would seek to manipulate them. You know, the sort of basic important stuff that you would want on your king. However, in order to better promote peace between the two kings, he also designed the crowns so that the two wearers would be able to not just speak to each other, but also feel each other's feelings. These were called the Twin Crowns of Mirmoran, but individually one was called the Twin Crown of Uthtower and the other was called the Twin Crown of Yarlith. The magical enchantments granted upon the crowns worked wonderfully to achieve these aims, and long-lasting peace was enjoyed between the two neighboring kingdoms. But then, of course, orcs invaded the lands. The massive army known as the Everhorde came to be. A massive collection of orcs, leadered by Illithids, assaulted all of the lands of the north, forcing many kingdoms to band together in order to fight it. Unfortunately, the kingdom of Yarlith was destroyed by the Everhorde before the orcs were repelled. Neverwinter also almost fell to them, but survived thanks to a gold dragon named Palarendusk, which we already know very well of, a staunch defender of the city. Now, the Everhorde was eventually defeated, but the armies of the allied kingdoms were decimated, and much to their demise, another orc horde rose up only 2 years after, from the south this time, coming from the High Moor, south of the Great Peak Mountains, and the Fields of the Dead. The armies struggled to create yet another unified front against this horde, and instead collected a smaller army at an old tower that used to belong to the kingdom of Uthtower. The tower was in fact the tower of an old archmage from the kingdom, one who happened to be named Inyarv. Yep, the same one who had previously created the crowns for the old twin kings a few generations ago. The battles between the armies and the orcs roused the old wizard, who by now was a lich. It appeared he had performed the ritual unto undeath to preserve his existence, and now, being woken up by armies fighting, it came out and started slinging powerful spells at both sides, dramatically hurting both armies. With the kingdom's armies being forced to retreat, the orcs had gained an entrance onto the Uthtower kingdom and now started destroying it. Quote, "As his kingdom crumbled about his throne, King Uth VII dispatched an emissary to Inyarv, beseeching the Lich to honor his alliance with the people of Uthtower and dispatch the invading orcs. With cruel humor, Inyarv honored the request by unleashing spells that caused the ocean to rise up and inundate the land. Countless humans, demi-humans, and orcs were drowned in the resultant flood. When the waters receded, they left behind a sprawling saltwater mere that smothered the once verdant land, transforming its topography and spelling the doom of the centuries-old kingdom of Uth. Those humans and demi-humans who survived the deluge quickly fled to other realms, while the orcs retreated to the Sword Mountains." End quote. And that's how the Mere of Dead Men came to be. A swamp filled with literally countless dead that either float in its waters, are buried in the muck, or still walk as undead to this day. Now, what does any of this have anything to do with Voaraghamanthar? Well, a lot. See, Voaraghamanthar is an adult black dragon, and he is currently the overlord of the Mere of Dead Men. Even though he is just an adult and not an ancient dragon, he's still a challenge rating 20 creature thanks to his ability to cast spells as an 11th level sorcerer. So, already being a CR 20 creature and having a lot of room to grow bodes fairly well for him, but that is not at all the reason that he is particularly special. You might wonder, how does a simple CR 20 dragon hold this swamp so effectively, say, versus any other dragon or adventurers that might wish to cleanse the Mere, or any of the various types of monsters that are found on this location, from undead to UNT? Well, Voaraghamanthar has a secret that is probably known to only 3, maybe 4 creatures in the entirety of Faerun, and one of those creatures is the secret. Voaraghamanthar, the black dragon known as the Black Death of the Mere of Dead Men, is actually 2 black dragons. They are, in fact, twins. Together, they use the name Voaraghamanthar, pretending to be one singular dragon in order to get an advantage against any of the myriad of creatures that they deal with all the time. Their true names are Weslum and Wulzaur, and they were born with an extremely interesting quirk where they in fact have an empathic link with each other. Through this link, provided that they are within line of sight of each other, they can telepathically speak with one another freely, and if they're not within line of sight of each other, they can communicate by sharing each other's emotions. Though throughout the centuries, they have learned to convey very specific meanings based on the feeling of each other's emotions. So for example, certain flavors of anger and stress might indicate a "come to me" sentence, or a combination of curiosity and playfulness might indicate a "I have company, hide nearby" sentence. This empathic link that they share transforms what otherwise would be an impossible alliance between two black dragons into one where they both perfectly trust each other and perform strategy and planning together in a symbiotic effort. They never have or will ever betray each other and will even die for one another. Of course, because secretly they do fear what would happen to the other if one of them were to die, deducing that the empathic link that they share would drive the other mad if one were to perish. See, one of the greatest weaknesses of dragonkind, especially those of chromatic dragons, is their inability to work together to achieve a common goal. This is in fact one of the reasons dragons don't quite rule the world right now. Extremely powerful dragons like Cloth, Arviturus, or Voaraghamanthar, as powerful as they are ultimately forced to contend with the fact that they are alone, and alone you can only achieve so much. Voragamanthar breaks this mold, being one of the only dragons that can do it, threatening to shatter everything that we understand about what is possible for a dragon to do, especially so if they happen to achieve their goals. Weslam and Wilsauer were born from the same egg as twins, an extremely rare thing because normally one of the babies will eat the other. Using their mental connection, they slaughtered the rest of their brothers on the nest and escaped the ire of their mother. Running from place to place, hiding away from their mom, they eventually heard the stories of the Mere of Dead Men, the same story that I just told you at the beginning of this video, the story of the legendary twin crowns of Mirmoran. All the kings from the kingdoms of Uthtower and Yarlith wore the crowns, and through them they could communicate with each other and feel each other's emotions. However, the stories passed down through the generations claim that the powers of the crown were never greater than when they were worn by the twin brothers, that the crowns had special magics that could only be unlocked when worn by twins. This is what drove the twin dragons to the Mere. When the orcs assaulted the kingdom and the Lich Inyarv flooded it all, the crowns were drowned alongside them. The crowns were somewhere in the Mere and the dragons wanted to find them. Plus, the old dragon who used to rule over the Mere had just disappeared. See, the first black dragon that moved onto the Mere, like right as the Mere came to be, was the black dragon known as Chardan Siaravitriol, a dragon that eventually came to be known as the Even Death. However, after centuries of governing the Mere, Even Death just disappeared. Nowhere to be seen. This meant that the great treasure hoard of Even Death was also up for grabs, a hoard that was stipulated to be enormous since, of course, it would theoretically also be the wealth of the old Kingdom of Uth, the wealth of a whole nation that the dragon had just stolen. Before I move on though, if you are at all interested in playing in a campaign or a series of adventures set here in the Mere of Dead Men, then I would recommend checking out Dungeon Magazine number 69, 70, 71, 72, and 73. Each of these has an adventure set in the Mere, and they are kind of meant to go together and tell a cohesive story. There's also the digital sequel to the Dragon of Icespire Peak. There's also some content in there in the Mere, so if you're at all interested, you can check those out. But okay, anyway, so let's talk a little bit about these crowns and what they would do for Voaraghamanthar if the dragons were to obtain them. So, quote, Inyarv enchanted powerful protections onto the twin crowns. Unknown to the rulers or subjects of either realm, however, the Mage Royal entwined additional enchantments onto the royal headgear to serve its own aims. The Archmage had established his abode on the western slopes of the Sword Mountains near the end of the reign of Uthtower's first king. Attracted by the solitary lifestyle he could establish there and relative peacefulness of the area, Inyarv won the confidence of Uthtower's second monarch, and the title of Mage Royal to ensure the title would not fall to a rival wizard, but otherwise cared little for the politics of the tiny realm. When the fledgling kingdom threatened to dissolve onto civil strife, Inyarv worked behind the scenes to ensure that an amicable truce would be achieved so as to pursue his studies of the art without disruption. Toward this end, Inyarv wove enchantments onto the twin crowns that would both ensure a harmonious relationship between their two bearers and allow Inyarv to exercise a measure of control over both crown bearers if he was forced by events to intervene once again. Individually, each of the twin crowns of Mirmoran provides its bearer numeral magical protections when worn. Such defenses include a +3 bonus to armor class and all saving throws, the protection of a mind blank spell, as well as immunity to all psionics, spells from the School of Enchantment/Charm, spells from the Sphere of Charm, or spell-like magical effects duplicating them. In addition, the bearer can cast Shield, Mirror Image, Fire Shield, Iron Guard, and Teleport once per day each. When the Twin Crown of Tower and the Twin Crown of Yarlith are worn at the same time by separate individuals, an empathic link is formed between the bearers that allows them to sense the emotional state of each other at any time and communicate via telepathy once per week, as long as both are on the same plane. When both crowns are worn by identical twins on the same plane of existence, the regalia's full powers come to fruition. The two bearers become linked in mind and soul while wearing the twin crowns, to the point where they become almost a single sentience. The twin crown bearers can communicate at will over any distance, and either twin can reach into the other's mind and cast spells their counterpart has memorized or regained, activate magical items triggered by silent act of will in the hands of the other twin, or even cast spells on their own form and have them affect the other twin instead. The most obvious effect of these powers is to draw the crown bearers into a nearly unshackable friendship for as long as both continue to wear their crown. In most cases where the crown bearers have radically different ethos, the weaker personality undergoes an alignment shift to that of the stronger personality. In the case of identical twins, the mental link forged by the twin crowns fuse the bearers' identities to the point where they almost become one. Over time, it becomes progressively more difficult for either crown bearer to remove his regalia, to the point, after many years, that neither crown bearer can live for any length of time without the magically enchanted empathic bond. Despite the risks entailed by protracted bearing of the twin crowns, an even more dangerous evil lurks behind the strength forged by the bearer's bond. Inyarv wove into them the power for a third individual to dominate both, by means of a demand spell employable at will on either or both wearers, assuming they are on the same plane of existence." End quote. Therein lies the true strength and greatest weakness of the twin crowns. If Weslam and Woolsauer were to get access to these magics, they would empower them, of course, but more importantly, their minds and souls would be as one. What one learns would immediately be learned by the other. It would be as if a single draconic soul could control two entire draconic bodies in a perfect, seamless fashion. It could calculate using two brains. It could perfectly orchestrate attacks from two fronts. It would combine its true breath weapons. It could attune to more magic items than any other dragon, and they could cast twice the spells than any other dragon could cast. A shield spell from one dragon could affect the other, regardless of how far they are. Sure, Inferno has a challenge rating of 40, but what if these dragons eventually reach ancient status, and then further are empowered by these relics to the point where they each become a CR 26 or even CR 30 creature? It's not crazy to think that two CR 30 creatures could beat a single CR 40 monster. But the question is, of course, has Voaraghamanthar gotten the crowns? Well, it's a bit unclear in the lore. What we do know is that canonically, they have won. The dragons have been deceiving the Cult of the Dragon a little bit. As you know, the Cult of the Dragon, they go around the continent and attempt to persuade dragons into becoming Draco Liches, as a way to offer them immortality in exchange for the cult being able to sort of control them a little bit. Now, the Black Dragons have been researching ways to achieve immortality, and it is one of their highest priorities at the moment, but they do fear undeath, and so generally consider it not an option to turn into a Draco Lich. However, both Weslam and Woolsauer are master actors and have played the Cult of the Dragon for fools by pretending to be interested in the transformation in order to get intel on what is happening outside of the mirror. Secretly, of course, they are just keeping them around with no intention on actually going through with it. But one of the biggest reasons the dragons made this alliance with the cult in the first place is because it was the Cult of the Dragon, after all, who transformed Ebon Death into a Draco Lich, which happened right at the tower from which the kingdom got its name. name, the Uth Tower. The tower currently is lost, submerged and hidden somewhere in the Mere, and everyone has been attempting to find it. The Cult of the Dragon have ways to find it, and so the dragon is playing along with them until the moment is opportune for a nice betrayal. And again, Voaraghamanthar is trying to find this tower because they believe that it is there where the last crown ought to be. See, the first crown, the one that they already have, had actually already been found by the cult, who was more than happy to give it to the dragons as a sign of goodwill towards them, working together. The crown is currently being worn by Weslam. It's on what would be his big toe on his left hind leg. And then the last crown that they need is on this tower that they're basically trying to find. Now, the reason why I say that it is a bit unclear whether they have or not the second crown is because that is actually part of one of the adventures that I mentioned previously, the Eye of Merkel adventure. I'm not really going to spoil much, but players get access to the crown, and in the end it is basically up to them to figure out what to do with it. Now, the adventure appears to be designed in such a way so as to make it very likely that the Black Dragons will get the crown in the end, as in the default course of events is that the dragons get it, but there are ways in which you could avoid it, so yeah, it's up for interpretation. It is a shame because whether they have the second crown or not does make an enormous difference in the state of affairs of the area. Not just in terms of the incredible power it would grant to the dragons, but the fact that if Inyarv, the Lich, still happens to be alive, then he could control the two dragons through the crowns. And now, you don't just have two enormously powerful black dragons, but a lich involved as well, and suddenly we start to see some apocalyptic level danger. I will also mention that we actually have no idea whether Inyarv is alive or not. After he created the Mere of Dead Men, he basically just vanished. His tower does appear on a 5th edition adventure, and you can even enter it, but the lore doubles down on the fact that he is missing, and it is a mystery whether he is even alive or not. But now, let's talk about the dragons themselves and their individual personalities and strategies. So, the Voragamanthar dragons are very smart and very active players in this world, unlike many of the other dragons. See, Arvituris is just out there sulking over the loss of her master. Clogliamatar spends her time watching women in cities like it's some kind of TV show. Inferno sleeps and practices. There's like no action with these dragons. It feels like they have found themselves at their apex and now they just plateaued. Imbrith, I felt like, was one of the few dragons that was out there like doing stuff. Well, Weslam and Wilsour don't actually care much if dragons walk in on their territory. They're not really playing the territory game. They're not prideful at all, they are scary calculating, and if they can't benefit from an interaction with you, they're likely to just let you pass through. But if they do, then you will usually see them coming. These are not like traditional black dragons who just like jump up from stealth and attack you straight up. Instead, they are actually very polite. They're very manipulative and resourceful, in particular if you're talking to Wilsour. So both are studious creatures, but Wilsour in particular likes to learn through socialization or activities. He's really the most outgoing brother. Weslam, on the other hand, prefers to read and study in private. He's a bit more reserved. However, in combat, it's interesting because the opposite is true. The usually reserved Weslam is typically the one who charges first to become the center of attention, while the more outgoing brother Wilsour will instead hide in the water close by. Wilsour is generally less versed in aerial and dry land combat, so he sticks to what he's good at, which is typically underwater. And so, as it would befit their strategy, Weslam typically has combat-ready spells that improve its ability to survive in direct melee. In particular, he likes using the spell Shield. His signature spell, however, is Enlarge, where he further increases in size in order to draw in attacks against him and distract enemies away from his brother. Wilsour, on the other hand, will move about unseen, either by moving through the water or by climbing rocky outcroppings using the spell Spider Climb. Wilsour's signature spell is an exclusive spell that he has called Acidosis, which basically just allows his blood to become pure acid, so non-magical weapons that pierce him get destroyed by the acid. Plus, there is a chance upon being struck that acid will splash onto the attacker, damaging them in return. Generally speaking, the goal of their strategy is to bring enemies down onto the water, where the Black Dragons would have an advantage. So they will either try and push enemies down or grapple them into the water. Against flying creatures, in particular against other dragons, they will try and use their acid breath to burn away the enemy's wings in order to then force them down. The black dragons will then use their innate power to foul the water, further sickening the enemy as it attempts to swim away from them. Quote, "In shallow water, the worms employ wing buffets to drive huge sprays of water at groups of opponents. When done on a body of water that they have previously corrupted, this tactic is extremely effective in inducing nausea in living opponents who cannot avoid ingesting some of the water." End quote. Of course, the way they fight, they do attempt to prevent an enemy from being able to see the two dragons at the same time. Remember that they are trying to keep this illusion that it is just one dragon that they're fighting, and so the way they move and alternate attacks makes it seem as if Voaraghamanthar is a dragon that can almost be in two places at once. You might think he hid in a ruin further down the path, only for the dragon to appear behind you with his breath weapon ready. You might think the dragon flew up above the tree line, only for claws to rip out from underneath you. Quote, "They are cunning and amoral, but never needlessly cruel or destructive. They have little interest in base displays of power or in the acquisition of territory, holding discretion to be the better part of valor, and their own lives to be more important than any short-term victory. The dragons are skilled actors, willing and able to adopt any persona that advances their long-term aims. They can read and reason as intelligently, patiently, and humbly as a timid human scholar, and they thirst for knowledge in any form, particularly if it relates to the art. They seek to ensure their long-term survival through the acquisition of magical items and a ceaseless pursuit of immortality, yet disdain the thought of undeath." End quote. In terms of magical items, Weslam wears a Ring of Wizardry, which grants him extra first-level spell slots. He has a Ring of Fire Resistance, and of course, the Twin Crown of Yarlith. Woolsour wears a powerful Ring of Invisibility and a Ring of Mind Shielding, both of which help him hide both in and out of combat. It's important to note that the name Voragamanthar is attributed specifically to Weslam, so if the name is used for the purposes of scrying or something like that, the scry will land on Weslam. So in spite of Woolsour being the more outgoing dragon, Weslam is considered to be the face of the twins. So whenever someone has to interact with the dragons, it is Weslam who shows up. And that's why Woolsour has the magic items that would let him hide, especially Ring of Mind Shielding that would prevent him from having his mind read. Woolsour also carries 6 doses of air spores. Air spores are eaten in order to grant you multiple days worth of breathable air into your lungs. This is specifically used on prisoners that the dragons kidnap, because what they do is they bury those prisoners in the muck. So they basically give them the air spores so that they can survive for days, and then bury them trapped underground. Woolsour also carries a portal hole, which is used to ferry both treasure and those very same prisoners. Now, in terms of their actual lair, we only have a very small passage that says, quote, "The Black Death and the Rapacious Raider dwell in the heart of the Mere of Dead Men, in a partially submerged keep above a labyrinth of flooded tunnels," end quote. That is all we have as far as their lair is concerned. We don't really know anything about their treasure hoard either, but we do know that they generally don't really seem to care that much for gold. They seem to be more than happy to sacrifice any amount of gold if it means that they are closer to their goals. Magical items, on the other hand, they do seem to respect and desire. Now, so to end this video, I leave you with this. It is very likely that the Voragamanthar brothers have the Twin Crowns of Mirmoran, which is nothing short of scary. On one hand, they could become one singular entity controlling 2 different bodies, multiplying their strength in such a way that could surpass even the most powerful of dragons in a few centuries once they grow old enough. On the other hand, they could very well nowadays be mind-controlled by an extremely powerful lich. The very same lich who convoked unimaginable power to create the very Mere of Dead Men. Either track spells doom to the lands around the swamp, and makes it even harder for there to be any hope that the Mere of Dead Men could be cleansed in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to click the link in the video description and check out Sands of Doom on Kickstarter. I'm gonna go ahead and leave you with the trailer just in case you haven't seen it. Enjoy.
Oh, great Sultana, listen to my counsel. Do not send your men into that ruin. The Anubian treasures have awakened. Their portents of doom whisper their coming. You think yourself the ruler of Al-Kirat, but these lands have always been theirs. Their monuments a testament to their might. You will bear the plagues for your sacrilege. The dead will roam the desert and paint the sands crimson. Dust will storm, rivers will flood. Blood will rain from the very stars. Disease and pestilence will cover your grass fields, and soon enough, even the sun will abandon you. Amu will come for you, and your precious little city will fall. You have imprisoned me for this prophecy, but I know something you don't. That is not a tomb. That is a prison. And you will set him free!
Remember to check out the campaign by clicking the link in the video description. Sands of Doom on Kickstarter. Thank you guys so very much.